My twin sister and I attended the same college, but one night, she got drunk and caused serious property damage. Instead of holding her accountable, my parents forced me to take the blame, insisting that I was the less intelligent twin who didn't belong there anyway. Their decision led to my expulsion, and from that moment on, I severed all ties with my family. Now, 5 years later, they suddenly show up at my doorstep, desperate and without a place to stay, because my sister betrayed them. But when they look at me, hoping for help, all I can think about is the past. Let me introduce myself properly. I'm Haley, 25 years old. My childhood was anything but easy. I grew up with two older brothers, Hunter, who is now 30, and Harold, 28. And then there's my twin sister, Heidi, though at this point, we are nothing more than strangers. The only family members I occasionally talk to are my brothers. As for my parents, a 60-year-old man and a 56-year-old woman, I cut them out of my life years ago. I never imagined they would try to reach out to me again, and yet, here we are. For years, I replayed different scenarios in my head. I always wondered what it would be like if my parents ever tried to contact me again. Would they apologize? Would they acknowledge the pain they caused? In my mind, that was the only way this could go. They would either ask for forgiveness or leave me alone forever. But reality had other plans. When the day finally arrived, instead of closure, all I felt was a new kind of betrayal. My parents never wanted 4 children. They had planned for 3. In their minds, 3 was the perfect number, the life they envisioned. But life had other plans, and my twin sister and I were born. From the very beginning, they made it painfully clear one of us was an extra, and that extra person was me. They never said it outright, but their actions spoke louder than words. Every day of my childhood, I felt like an unwanted addition, a mistake they had to live with. To be fair, it was only my parents who treated me that way. My brothers, Hunter and Harold, always had my back. Even as kids, they saw what was happening, and in their own way, they tried to make sure I felt included, valued. I honestly don't know what I would have done without them. They were my safe place in a house where I felt like an outsider. But the favoritism started young. When our parents bought gifts, Heidi got first pick, and I was left with whatever she didn't want. If lunch was based on our preferences, it was always Heidi's taste that mattered. To them, the twins were a single unit, but that unit was just Heidi. I was never seen as an individual. I was only acknowledged as not Heidi, and Heidi loved it. She soaked up the attention like a sponge, basking in the favoritism. As we grew older, things only got worse. And now, after all these years, my parents expect me to forget everything and help them. But why should I? As time passed, I withdrew into myself more and more. At home, the only people I ever felt comfortable talking to were my brothers. They weren't particularly fond of Heidi, mostly because she barely interacted with them. And when she did, it was as if she thought she was better than everyone else, like her words carried more weight than ours. That's not how siblings are supposed to treat each other, especially not brothers and sisters. But that's just who she was. She had been treated like royalty her entire life, and she assumed Hunter and Harold would do the same. They didn't. So, naturally, she was never close to them. Academically, both of us did well. In the beginning, our grades were about the same, but as high school went on, Heidi started slipping. It wasn't surprising. She was heavily involved in extracurricular activities and had an active social life. Meanwhile, I went in the opposite direction. When my brothers left for college, I threw myself into my studies. That was the only way I knew how to cope with their absence. With them gone, home felt unbearable, so I focused all my energy on school and spent my free time volunteering at a local shelter. Then came the college applications. That's when things really started to unravel. To be fair, Heidi had a better resume than I did. Despite her declining grades, her extracurricular involvement made her stand out more. Honestly, I didn't think I had much of a shot at getting into a top school, but I applied anyway. And in a twist none of us expected, we both got accepted into the same university. I hated it. The last thing I wanted was to be stuck in the same place as her. Even our parents weren't thrilled about it. Not because they didn't want us together, but because I got in, too. They had always been rooting for Heidi, and the fact that I was just as good as her, maybe even better, seemed to bother them. It was like my acceptance somehow disrupted their perfect narrative of Heidi being the golden child. And the best part? I got a scholarship. She didn't. Once college started, our lives completely diverged. She embraced the party scene immediately, while I had no interest in that lifestyle. It didn't take long for things to start spiraling. One night, just a few months into our first semester, I got a frantic call from Heidi. I hadn't spoken to her more than twice since we arrived at college, so I was immediately on edge. She sounded panicked, almost hysterical, begging me to come help her. I asked her what was wrong, but she refused to explain over the phone. She just kept saying that it was bad, really bad, and that she needed me to come to her room right away. When I arrived, she looked completely shaken. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of concern. No matter how we were raised, she was still my sister, and seeing her that distressed made me worry. But I had no idea that the next few minutes would change my life forever. She confessed that she had been out partying with some friends. Everyone had gotten completely wasted. Some were even blacked out. Since she was the least drunk of the group, they decided she should be the one to drive them home. But the problem was, she was still very drunk. She lost control of the car and crashed straight into the wall of someone's house. The police had already been involved. They took her information and told her she needed to come to the station the next day. She was terrified. She didn't want a record, didn't want this incident to ruin her future. And that's when she made the biggest mistake of all. She decided that my future was less important than hers. I asked Heidi if she had spoken to Mom and Dad about what happened. She said she had, but they were furious with her, and she didn't want to deal with them. Instead, she told me she needed to clear her head and grab something to eat. I didn't think much of it at the time, but she took my wallet along with hers when she left. What happened next was a betrayal so deep that I wouldn't have expected it from my worst enemy. I stayed with her that entire night, trying to comfort her. She was gone for a while, but when she returned, she looked noticeably calmer, like she had figured something out. I was exhausted, so I went back to my room, completely unaware of the disaster that was about to unfold. The next morning, I was summoned to meet with my department head. He said it was urgent. Confused and anxious, I hurried over, only to find police officers waiting for me. For a brief moment, I assumed they were there for Heidi. But then they turned to me. The officers started questioning me, asking why I had been drinking and driving the night before. They told me the university had launched a disciplinary inquiry against me. I was stunned. I told them they had the wrong person, that it wasn't me, but my twin. Their response sent chills down my spine. They said the offender had identified herself as Haley Porter and had even presented an ID to prove it. They accused me of lying and told me to drop the act. That was when everything clicked into place. Heidi had set me up. She had used my ID, my name, to cover for herself. The entire reason she had called me that night, acting scared and vulnerable, was to make sure I stayed by her side. And while she was out getting air, she had gone straight to the police and submitted my identification instead of her own. But she hadn't stopped there. When she got back, she convinced me to have a drink, playing the part of a distressed sister who just needed some support. I had been overwhelmed and stressed, so I gave in. That meant that if anyone tested me for alcohol, the results would still come back positive. It was a perfect trap. I begged the officers to listen. I told them the truth, that my twin had framed me. But they didn't believe me. It sounded too far-fetched, too ridiculous. They dismissed me, and I left the meeting in complete devastation. I tried calling Heidi, but she didn't answer. So I called Mom and Dad, desperately hoping they would back me up and tell the truth. Instead, they told me I had to understand that Heidi's future would be destroyed if I didn't take the fall for her. They reminded me that she had taken out loans for college, whereas I had a scholarship, so it wasn't as bad for me. Their message was clear. I owed this to my sister. I was speechless. I had always known they favored her, but this wasn't favoritism anymore. This was pure cruelty. They were willing to sacrifice me to protect her. To them, Heidi's future mattered. Mine didn't. It felt like a slap in the face. No, actually, it felt like being slapped over and over again, in front of an audience, while everyone watched in silence. I hung up and immediately called Harold. The second I told him what happened, he was livid. He promised he would talk to Mom and Dad, but in the meantime, he told me not to admit to something I didn't do. He urged me to stick to the truth, no matter how much pressure I was under. He said he would handle the rest, but none of that mattered in the end. Within a week, the university expelled me on behavioral grounds. Just like that, my future was ripped away from me. That was the day I buried my parents and sister in my mind. From that moment on, they were dead to me. Mom and Dad expected me to come home after everything, but I had nothing left to say to them. I couldn't bear to face them, not after what they had done. Instead, I went straight to Hunter's place, where I sat down and wrote a letter to the university. In that letter, I laid out everything. The real story, the truth about what had happened that night. Deep down, I knew it wouldn't change anything. They wouldn't reverse my expulsion. But I needed to document it, to have a written record in case it ever became relevant in the future. After that, I cut off all contact with my parents. They tried to reach out a few times, calls, messages, even emails. But I ignored every single one. There was nothing left to say. During this time, my brothers were my rock. Hunter and Harold supported me in ways I could never repay. From what little they've told me, and I don't ask for details, they completely tore into Mom and Dad. They made sure our extended family and even some of our parents' friends knew exactly what had happened. They didn't hold back. The fallout was severe. Mom and Dad found themselves isolated, ostracized by the very community they had always wanted to impress. And honestly, they deserved it. Hunter and Harold went low contact with them, too. All our lives, Mom and Dad only wanted to be parents to Heidi. They told me once. So we're just giving them exactly what they wanted. I stayed with Hunter rent-free for a few months. He refused to let me pay for anything, even after I got a job. Instead, he told me to save up every penny because I'd need it for college. That's exactly what I did. The next academic year, I enrolled in a new university. And despite everything I had gone through, I realized that, in a twisted way, this whole ordeal had led me to something better. For the first time, I was able to study what I truly wanted, not what was expected of me. I had to take out loans, sure, but at least this time, there was no Heidi, no unfair competition, no shadow looming over me. I could live life on my own terms. There's still a gap in my academic record, an entire year missing and an unexplained expulsion sitting on my transcript. But in the end, it didn't matter. I graduated 2 years ago, landed a solid job straight out of college, and built a life I actually enjoyed. The job took me to the other side of the country, which was both terrifying and freeing. Moving away, starting fresh, it felt strange at first. But now, after 2 years of working, I can confidently say that my life is good. Really good. As for Heidi and my parents, they still try to contact me every now and then. Calls, messages, some even sound like desperate attempts at reconciliation. But I don't respond. I don't need them. I've moved on, and they are the ones left carrying the guilt. They know they were wrong. That's why they're the ones trying to reach out, scrambling to make amends. Hunter and Harold remain low contact with them, but we don't really talk about our parents much. When I do ask for an update, my brothers fill me in, but they never volunteer information on their own. More importantly, they never tell Mom and Dad anything about me. Not where I live, not what I do, not how I'm doing. And they never will. That's the one thing I've asked of them, to keep me completely invisible to our so-called parents. And for all these years, they have respected that. A few days ago, at the crack of dawn, 5 a.m., to be exact, my doorbell started ringing incessantly. Half asleep and groggy, I stumbled toward the door, assuming it was some kind of mistake. Maybe a neighbor in need, maybe a delivery gone wrong. But when I swung the door open, all the drowsiness drained from my body. There they were, Mom and Dad, standing on my doorstep, bright-eyed and unapologetic, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. And the way they walked right past me into my house, completely uninvited, made it painfully clear I wasn't dreaming. This was real. "We've missed you so much," Mom started, her voice dripping with manufactured emotion. "It's been too long since we've spoken." Dad chimed in. "We cry every night, sweetheart. We just had to come see you." I stood frozen, my mind racing. They didn't even sound guilty, just entitled. Like they thought showing up unannounced would magically fix the years of betrayal. Then I snapped out of it. "How did you get my address?" I asked, my voice sharp. They exchanged a glance, hesitant for the first time. Then Mom smiled, fake, rehearsed, insincere. "Hunter gave it to us," she said. I immediately pulled out my phone and called Hunter. The second he picked up, I laid into him. "What the hell, Hunter? You gave them my address." "What? No. I would never." Click. I hung up and flung the phone onto the couch. Turning back to my parents, I folded my arms. "Try again." Their expressions shifted, nervous now, but still trying to act like they were in control. "I don't want you here," I said plainly. "So either tell me the truth about how you found me, or I'll throw you onto the street. I don't care where you go." Then I noticed something I hadn't seen before: suitcases. Multiple. Big ones. My stomach dropped. They weren't just visiting. They were planning to stay. I took a deep breath. Who told you where I live? They deflected. Tried gaslighting me. Tried playing the poor, heartbroken parents act. But I wasn't buying it. You have 15 minutes, I said. Either you tell me the truth, or you're out. No discussion. They stalled. Laughed it off. Tried to act like I was being dramatic. So I didn't wait for 15 minutes. I grabbed one of their suitcases, dragged it to the front door, and shoved it outside. Their laughter immediately stopped. You're serious? Dad asked, stunned. I grabbed another suitcase. Dragged. Shoved. They finally cracked. Okay. Mom blurted. We found your address on social media. I paused. What? Dad sighed. We've been following you through fake accounts for a few months. That's how we found out where you live. My blood ran cold. They were stalking me. How? I barely posted anything personal. How did they figure out my exact address? I wanted to ask, but I was too damn tired for this nonsense, especially on a Saturday morning. I sighed. Fine. You have a few hours. I'm going back to sleep. Figure out where you're going next, because it won't be here. They started to protest, but I didn't care. I turned on my heel, marched upstairs, locked my door, and collapsed onto my bed. I told myself I didn't care if they stole something. I just needed to sleep. When I woke up, I walked downstairs and almost lost it all over again. My living room was a disaster. Suitcases opened. Clothes everywhere. They had unpacked. They had moved in. I took a deep breath, pushing down my frustration. Okay, no immediate explosion. Let's try one more time. I crossed my arms, surveying the chaos. What? I asked coolly. Made you think you could actually stay here? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. For years, they had bent over backward to protect Heidi, sacrificing me in the process. And now, after she completely ruined their lives, they still refused to hold her accountable? Instead of going to the police like any sane person would, they wanted to send her to therapy and move in with me? They had to be joking. I stared at them, waiting for the punchline. But it never came. You're telling me that Heidi forged legal documents, sold your house behind your backs, and kicked you out onto the street. And instead of turning her in, you're here, expecting me to fix this for you? Mom sniffled. She's our daughter. We can't just. I cut her off with a laugh, an actual laugh. It was just so predictable. Even now, when she had completely destroyed their lives, they were still protecting her. Still. Well, I said, crossing my arms. It looks like your only daughter got you into this mess. Maybe she can get you out of it, too. Dad frowned. You don't mean that. Oh, I do. I gestured toward their suitcases. I meant it when I said you weren't staying here. So unless you plan on actually doing something about Heidi, something real, not just sticking her in therapy while you mooch off of me, you need to figure out where you're going next. They sat there in stunned silence, like they truly hadn't expected this reaction. I sighed, shaking my head. You burned this bridge years ago, I said. I've moved on. And I suggest you do the same, without me. And with that, I grabbed my keys, walked out the door, and left them sitting there. Let them figure it out on their own. It's what they do best, right? I stared at them, completely stunned, like a deer caught in headlights. It took me a few minutes to fully process the audacity of what they were asking. Instead of holding Heidi accountable for her crime, they had come to me, knowing full well what she had done. It was as if they had completely forgotten how they had thrown me under the bus years ago, forcing me to take the blame for their criminal daughter. At first, they said nothing. But as I kept pressing them, they finally spoke. They told me I needed to show compassion. Heidi had always been troubled, and as parents, it was their duty to stand by her when she strayed, not throw her to the dogs. I reminded them that they had never stood by me, not even when I had done nothing wrong. And from the way they spoke, it was obvious. They had only ever been interested in being parents to Heidi, not to me. And since they didn't see me as family, I had no problem throwing them to the dogs. I told them, in no uncertain terms, that they were not welcome here. They were homeless by choice, not because they were in distress. They had allowed this to happen, and even now, they were still enabling Heidi, letting her get away with everything. This was entirely on them. They tried again, pushing, guilt-tripping, emotionally blackmailing me. But I made it very clear, nothing they said was going to work. Eventually, they seemed to finally get it. They kept making faces, but in the end, they had no choice but to leave. Even as they walked out, they kept pleading, saying they had nowhere to go. I just repeated that it wasn't my problem. They had other kids they could run to. But as far as I was concerned, they were dead to me. And no matter what happened, I wouldn't be helping them. They left looking completely defeated. That was 3 days ago. Since then, I haven't heard from them. I should be relieved, but my head has been pounding ever since. I have no idea where they went, and while I don't want them contacting me, I can't help but wonder where they ended up. Update 1. I know it hasn't been long, but I have an update. Yesterday, Hunter called me. Apparently, our parents showed up at his place unannounced, just like I expected. I had already warned both him and Harold, since Harold lives too far away to be a target. Hunter told me they immediately launched into their sob story, but this time, I was the villain. They said I had cruelly kicked them out, that I had always been ungrateful, and that they knew they had been right to favor Heidi all along, because I had grown up to be a bitch anyway. Hunter mumbled that if anyone was a bigger bitch, it was Heidi, since she was the one who stole their house. But even after everything, they still defended her. Hunter was exhausted. And his girlfriend, CIA? Livid. CIA doesn't do drama. She has zero patience for anyone's nonsense, and she's the type to say exactly what's on her mind. So, needless to say, she wasn't having it. CIA didn't waste any time. She looked straight at them and asked, "How long do you plan to stay?" They hesitated before answering. "A while." CIA wasn't having it. "How long exactly?" They danced around the question again, saying, "Just a couple of days." At that point, she lost patience. She told them to give her an actual date so she could plan accordingly. That's when they finally admitted they didn't have a timeline, because they were just waiting for Heidi to come to her senses so they could move back into their house. That was the moment CIA had been waiting for. She told them, fine, they could stay, as long as they wanted. They barely had time to process that before they started celebrating, thinking they had won. But she wasn't finished. "There's a catch," she added. My mother quickly cut in, all eager to please. "Oh, don't worry, we won't disturb your privacy. We'll clean up after ourselves. No late-night parties. We'll be the perfect guests." CIA just laughed. "That's not what I'm talking about." Then she dropped the bomb. They could only stay if they pressed charges against Heidi and took active steps to reclaim their house. Hunter told me their reaction was priceless, like they had just been stabbed in the gut. They called CIA cruel and said they couldn't do it. But she didn't budge. She told them this was their only option. She was offering them a roof over their heads, but they had to do the right thing in return. If they still chose to protect Heidi, that was their decision, but they couldn't turn around and blame their kids for abandoning them. And, of course, to no one's surprise, they said they would rather be homeless than betray their daughter. CIA just smirked and said, "Congratulations," before kicking them out. Honestly, I love that woman. Hunter says he has no idea where they went after that. He's worried they might try crawling back to me, but I told him not to stress. If they show up here again, they'll be walking right back out. Update 2. Well, it finally happened. They were forced to press charges against Heidi and her little crew. Turns out, the RWA, Resident Welfare Association, had received so many complaints that they took action themselves. I don't have all the details, but I do know one thing. Heidi is screwed. As for our parents, they aren't speaking to any of us. And honestly, we couldn't be happier. Heidi did try reaching out to Hunter, begging him to talk some sense into Mom and Dad. He never responded. That was the last we heard from them, and I hope it stays that way. They're so bizarrely enmeshed with each other. It's actually disturbing. If they can't pull their heads out of their asses, that's on them. I worked too damn hard to build this life from nothing, and I'll be damned if I let them waltz in and ruin it.